All right. Hi, everyone. This is Heather Van Cura. Thanks for joining us today. This is our third Adopt-a-JSR for Java EE online meeting for 2017. And we're joined again today by several of our Java EE spec leads. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
I'd like to just go ahead and introduce our spec leads. So today we have Linda, who's here as the Java EE umbrella spec lead. She's joining us again. She's been on all of our calls so far. Hi, Linda.
Hi there.
Hi. Thanks for joining us again. It's always great to have you here and get your perspective as the umbrella spec lead for Java EE 8. And then we also have today, we have Gunnar Morling from Red Hat with Bean Validation 2.0. Hi, Gunnar.
Right. Hello, good morning. Oh yeah, good morning to you. Good evening for me. Thanks
to
for having
you.
me. It's a
Thanks
pleasure.
for accommodating us and your schedule. I appreciate it. I'm in San Francisco today. I know I'm always in a different location for these meetings, but in case you're wondering, that's the quiz for today. I'm in San Francisco. All right, and we have Pavel from the JAX-RS 2.1 JSR. Hi, Pavel.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Heather. Yeah, I'm in Prague, so it's same time zone as Gunnar, so evening for me as well.
Yes,
Right.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. And we have Will Hopkins with the Security JSR.
Hello.
Hi, Will.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Early afternoon for me.
Okay, you're on the East Coast. Where are you on the East Coast?
Near Boston, Lexington.
All right. Nice. Okay, so we've got, a diverse crowd here today. Nice to have everybody here to get started. Big crowd. So I did get one question before we get started, which was a few people have been following this series of meetings and they're like, what is Adopt-a-JSR? So I'll just share a little bit before we get started. So Adopt-a-JSR is a global outreach program. It was developed as a grassroots program by a couple of Java user groups that are very active in the global community. London Java community started out, and then So Java in Brazil came on board and started expanding that program. And it is developed for Java user groups. That was the question. So is this for Java user groups or is it for everyone? So it was developed with Java user groups in mind, but I think it's really important to note that you can do it as an individual. We have had a couple of folks do it as an individual. So if you're not affiliated with a user group or you don't have people in your local community that you want to work with and discuss the JSRs that are being developed to be part of Java in the future, you can do it on your own. But what we found in the way it's been developed is if you have groups of developers coming together and discussing the technologies as they're being developed and then sharing their feedback and some of the outcomes that they experience as they do some of the tasks that the spec leads will point out for you, that you actually can come up with some better feedback and you'll also help each other along the way. So you're learning from each other, you're helping each other, and then you're giving that real world experience to the JSR spec leads as they're actually evolving the technology. So it's better as a technology before it's implemented in the final specifications in the JSRs. So thereby you're creating better technologies that developers can use every day, and we get a little bit of a broader and diverse perspective than you might get it just from the expert group who's working on the technologies. So to give a little bit of context, that's what Adopt-a-JSR is all about. It's a way for developers around the world working together in their local communities to have an influence on the future of Java and to impact the JSRs as they're being developed. So without further ado, that is my intro to what we're talking about today. We've got 3 specific actions from spec leads that are going to give you a little bit of insight into their JSR, what's going on with it, where they are in the process going through the JCP, and how you as Java developers can get involved and help and contribute to making their JSR better before it goes final sometime. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Gunnar, who is going to tell us about Bean Validation 2.0, one of the newest JSR, actually. That's JSR 380. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Just let me share my screen. Yeah, so thank you so much for this introduction and the great overview. Yeah, so my name is Gunnar Morling. I work for Red Hat, and I'm based in Hamburg in Germany. But yeah, it's a really distributed team. We are working on Bean validation. So some guys are in Europe, some are well, essentially all over the world, I should say. And today I would like to, well, first give you a quick overview of what bean validation actually is in case you did not have the chance to use it. Then a bit, I'm going to talk about what are the new features in bean validation 2.0, where we are, and yeah, especially, of course, how you can help us, because this is what this talk is about. Yeah, and bean validation, what is it? It's a model which allows you to put constraints, let's say conditions which should be met to your object model. So you could have this user class, and there you might want to express that this email property, it should be never null. So you put this add not null constraint there, or it should be a valid email address. Or you have this other property which is an integer, and here you maybe want to say this integer for each and every user instance, it should be at least 12. And bean validation allows you to express these kind of constraints using Java annotations. And then there's a validation engine defined, which takes these constraints and validates them. And now you have the chance to either validate or, yeah, execute them manually, so you can bootstrap a validator object, but that's not really what it is meant to be. It's more that you would benefit from validation happening automatically in useful points in the object lifecycle. So, for instance, if you put constraints to your JPA entities, then these constraints on the entity attributes would be validated when you persist an entity. Or if you put constraints to JAX-RS resource classes, then the constraints would be validated when the resource is invoked. And well, there is integration with many different specifications. So SSH, JPA, JAX-RS, also UI technologies like JSF. But it does not stop there. It also is integrated or used by a lot of other technologies, like Spring MVC is using it, or GWT and many others. And the good thing is it's part of Java EE. So it originally was part of Java EE 6. But it's very well and equally well usable on Java SE. So there's a Bootstrap API, which CDI, for instance, is adding right now. We had this in bean validation from the get-go, which was one of the reasons that Spring could use it that well. And then we had bean validation 1.1 in Java EE 7, and this added a lot of useful features. I just want to add or to mention one which is very close to my heart, and this is method validation. And method validation allows you to put these constraints to the parameters of methods, or to the return values of methods. And this is great because you can now express your invariants, which should apply before and after a method invocation. And if you think about, well, I guess often you do it, you put it into your Java doc that a specific parameter should not or must not be null, and that there may be it may have to satisfy a specific value range. And then you implement this kind of check programmatically, and then you need to, well, keep the Java docs in sync. And well, this is all not needed if you just use bean validation. And this will happen automatically for you right upon method invocation. So if you are in a managed environment, such as CDI or let's say Spring, and you have set up things correctly, then you will automatically have these constraints validated upon method invocation. So that's what has happened so far. And now we are getting to bean validation 2.0. And well, the tagline for this is embrace Java 8. So a couple, well, yeah, let's like 2.5 years ago, Java 8 was released. And for once, it comes with a lot of interesting library additions, like the new Java Time API, but it also comes with very interesting new language features. And the topic of bean validation 2.0 now is to, for once, support those library additions and then also take benefit of the new language features. And speaking about supporting new library features, so there's this new Java Time API defined by JSR 3.10, and bean validation already had defined the add past and the add future constraint, and they used to work just for the legacy Java Time types, and now you also can put them essentially to all of the JSR 3.10 date and time types, like local date or date with time zones and so on, or year, as here in the example. And we also added this all present member, which allows you to say, well, this year, which I have here in my variable inception year, it should be either in the current year or it should be in the past. So this is how this new API is supported. Then more in the language feature category, there's support for repeatable annotations. So there may be cases where you want to apply the same type of constraint several times. Let's say you have this add size constraint on a password property, and for a regular user, you would like to say the password should be at least 8 characters long, but for an admin user, it should be 12 characters long. So you can use several constraints of the same type at size, have them in different validation groups, and until now you would have to use this wrapper annotation at list to do this. But now, thanks to repeatable annotations in Java 8, you just can put the constraint multiple times there. So that's nice. Makes life a bit easier. But the biggest feature which we have in Bean Validation 2.0 is what we call constraints on container elements. And by this, we mean you have generic container types like the Java util optional, but also like list or map. And often there's this requirement that you want to put constraints to the elements of such a container. So here you want to say, I want this optional string to be a valid email address. And well, you cannot put this, or you cannot do this by putting the add email annotation to the property itself, because, well, this is an optional, it's not a string, so this constraint doesn't work there. But by putting it to the type parameter, this is now doable. So the validation engine will know, okay, you don't want to apply the email to the optional, but to the string, which is wrapped by the optional. So that's how we take advantage of these new type use annotations in Java 8. And this, as I said, works for optional. It works for collections. So you could say, I have this list, and this list of names, each of the strings which is contained, it should be not null, and it should be at least 5 characters long. And here you also see why it's very useful to be able to put the constraint to the type argument, because you also could have a size constraint on the list itself, which then would say, okay, there should be at least one element in the list, whereas the constraint on the type argument, it says each of the elements should be a character, at least of 5 characters. And it also works for what we call cascaded validation. So this also was there in Bean Validation 1.0, but it's now more flexible. You can not only cascade into values of, let's say, lists or maps, but you can essentially cascade into every object which is stored in containers. And one example would be you could cascade now into the keys of maps. So here you are saying that when I validate this addresses property, each of the keys in this map, which are user objects, as well as each of the addresses, which are the values in the map, those should recursively validate as well. It doesn't stop there. There's support for arrays, JavaFX property, and it's pluggable. So you could add support for your own custom container types. Like, let's say you have a other collection library like Guava, collections, then you could also support those containers by implementing a contract which we have defined. So that's it very quickly in what will be there in Bean Validation 2.0. So that's a few of the interesting features. There's of course more, but just to give you a quick overview. Where are we? So we released an early draft a couple of weeks ago. It will be on, I think, until March of 13. So any feedback on this would be very much appreciated. And of course, you don't need to you don't have to just read the spec, but you also can actually try it out. Because just a few days after the early draft, we also released the reference implementation, which implements the early draft and which allows you to try out, for instance, these type use constraints, but then it adds some stuff on top of it where we also thought, well, it might be interesting to get some feedback there. And one of these features is the support for using lambda expressions to validate constraints. So in this example here, well, we have this API in Hibernate Validator, which lets you declare constraints programmatically and define them programmatically. And here we now use a lambda expression to say, well, when this file exists constraint is applied to the file type, then use please this lambda expression, essentially call file exists, the file exists method to validate this. So this even spares you from having to write a custom constraint validator implementation. So this is something we just have in the reference implementation. If you think it should be part of the spec, please get in touch and let us know about your preferences. And yeah, more generally, how could you get involved, or what could you do to help us? So the most important thing right now is to get feedback. So as I said, there's this early draft. Give it a try, add it to your project, and play a bit with the new features. The most complex one is this container element validation stuff. So this would be most interesting for us to get feedback. And as I said, there's a API which makes this pluggable. So this would be awesome if you had, let's say, you work with a custom collection library, or maybe you work with an alternative JVM language, which does not implement the Java collection API, but another one. Then you could implement this value extractor API, as it's called, and yeah, put those type use constraints to those collection types. And this would be very interesting for us to learn about your feedback. There's a mailing list, which is our primary means of communication. I will have a link at the end. So join us there and let us know about your thoughts. Report bugs if you find them. Also features. Also, we probably won't add too much at this point, but we'll rather focus on polishing and driving home the existing ones. But if you have a good case where you think this or that feature should be supported, come to the mailing list and let us know about it. And well, if you work on this and create an actual proposal, chances are good we would include it. It would help if you spread the word. So let's tweet, write blog posts about your experience with new features. What do you think about it? This will help, of course. You have the chance to talk either to me or to Emmanuel Bernard, which is the previous spec lead. So Emmanuel will be at Devoxx in March. I will be at JavaLand in March in Germany. So if you happen to be at one of those conferences, it would be a great opportunity to have a talk about this. And of course, you can join the expert group. So it's free. There are low barriers. If you think you have something to contribute, feel free to join. And one thing, Heather? Okay. One thing close to my heart is that everything is what we do in Bean Validation is open. So it's all open source, it's all Apache licensed. So the API is open source on GitHub. The specification, which we just converted to ASCII doc, so it's nice to write, it's open source. The TCK, so we are one of the JSRs which have a completely open source TCK. So you can write new test cases if you want, or challenge them. Also, the website beanvalidation.org is on GitHub, so you even can change the website. And of course, reference implementation as well. All this stuff, all these things are open source. You can send a pull request to them, see how they work, and yeah, it's quite easy to contribute. It's just as your regular open source project. And beanvalidation.org is the central hub, which has all the information really. Just quickly on the next steps, so we will converge, or we will pick up some loose ends on the container element validation. We will likely add some new constraints. So we made a survey in the last year asking about what kind of constraints would people like to see, and we got some good feedback from the community from this. So we will add this, and of course it's about your request. So if you have something which you really think should be in Bean Validation 2.0, well, make your case on the mailing list, and we will be very happy to discuss it. Quickly on the timeline, so we may do another early draft. We have to see how this works out, but for sure there will be the public review in April or May, or April and May. And well, the goal, of course, is to be there on time for Java E8. So that's really what counts for us. And yeah. In terms of contribution, we have a very diverse expert group. So it's people from all different kinds of companies or private people. And they did a lot of different contributions, which are just awesome. Just to name one example, Henrik Ebers, another German guy, he got in touch with a designer to create this fantastic logo. So it was his idea. He said, well, Bean Validation should have a logo. And well, we were really happy to have this. And this was just a fantastic contribution. That is really much appreciated. And finally, gets more interesting to share afterwards some resources, beanvalidation.org, where the source code lives, and how to get in touch. So I'm on Twitter. If you like, just ping me and we can chat on Bean Validation. That's about it. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thanks, Gunnar. Great information. Good to see you're going to be at a couple conferences coming up. It's good timing since you got your early draft review open. It's a fantastic time to get involved with Bean Validation. I'm going to be at Devoxx US. I won't be at JavaLand this year. I've been there in the previous years, but Devoxx US this year. So I encourage people to get involved, everyone that I meet.
Absolutely.
Great to hear directly from you. So next we'll move on to Pavel with JAX-RS. Pavel, I'll hand it over to you. You can share a little bit about what's going on with JAX-RS, JSR 370. I know you've been very active and submitted something to get posted on jcp.org. So tell us what's going on.
Okay. Can you see my screen? I hope you do.
Yes, we can see
Okay.
it.
Thank you. So hi again, I'm Pavel, and I will be talking about JAX-RS 2.1, which is JSR 370, and it's basically a progress update. And again, same as Gunnar, what can you do if you want to help, and what is going to happen next? So just want to thank you and maybe introduce the expert group and thank to all of them which are participating. Also, JAX-RS EG has 2 spec leads, Santiago and me. So Santiago didn't make it today, but he will be actually talking on several conferences, and but I will get to that later. If you will meet him, then definitely talk to him about JAX-RS if you have anything you'd like to discuss. So I will be talking about recent additions which were kind of finalized in JAX-RS API. Those are active client and service and events, and some like Java 9 readiness, just basically heads up what is happening in this area, and then the roadmap and how can you help. Just wanted to point out at the beginning that the reactive client API and the service and events is actually something which came up from the reference implementation, which is Jersey. So it's a nice example of having something done in the implementation side and then moving it into the specification itself, because it's kind of proven by time, and users really want to have it in the specification so they can write more portable applications using these features. So let's start about reactive client API. So JAX-RS client already contained support for asynchronous invocations, but this is basically about utilizing what Java SE8 brought, and in this case, it's completion stage in completable future. Actually, if you know future API, you most likely know, but then it's kind of blocking. You cannot really register callback or a handler which will be invoked when the feature completes. So completion stage fixes that. And then it's really simple to write cases like on the right side of the slide, basically calling two different services, then using the output or the response from these services to produce something, and then do, I don't know, in this case, we are just printing it out, but you can do whatever you want. You can store it in database or use it as a request calling another service. So this actually, if written by Java Futures or older version of the APIs, would take well, the amount of code wouldn't fit this this slide. So this is a really big improvement. I really like, especially the combining several completion stages into one. Another thing which is really important is that we kind of recognize that there is already lots of reactive frameworks out in the wild. For example, RxJava. So I'm not sure whether somebody else is doing that. Maybe yes, maybe no. I guess we are not the first, but JAX-RS 2.1 will most likely contain the plugin point for these frameworks. So you are not forced to work only with completion stage, but you could work directly with followable or listenable future. Or I'm not sure what Reactor uses. So basically, as long as you have this invoker provider implementation and an invoker implementation from somewhere, then you could plug in any type or any reactive framework. So it will definitely improve writing the portable applications, because if this plugin is written correctly, then it can be used on different implementations of JAX-RS. So you can use it on WebSphere, or you can use it on. WebLogic or Glassfish, and it shouldn't matter. That's about reactive client API. Another feature is service and events. So if you don't know what service and events is, that it's basically about having a stream of events from server to the client, and that's basically it. It's a standard version of standard way how to do long polling. It's built. It's still using HTTP. It's just another media type, and as I said, as similarly with the reactive client API, we already supported in Jersey for years now. So this API is slightly different than what is in Jersey. It's I guess smaller, and I like it a little bit more. And it allows you to basically do the standard case, so return a stream of events from the server and consume them on the client. On the server side, we recognize another use case that's basically managing or grouping the clients into some broadcast domain. It can be from same resource, it can be from multiple resources. It doesn't really matter. So you can just broadcast a single message to all of them, and the underlying implementation will actually take care of the broadcasting. Like you will just send one message, or it would look like you are sending one message. Another important thing about Service and Events API in JAX-RS is that we are trying to adapt Flow APIs from Java SE9. And you might have a question about it because it doesn't really make sense, right? JAX-RS 2.1 will be part of Java EE8, but we are trying to adapt something which is in Java. And Java EE8 will work on Java SE8, and I'm talking about Java SE9. So I'm not saying that we will copy the Flow interface into JAX-RS, but we will try to be as ready as possible when there is a version of JAX-RS which will depend on Java SE9. So currently, if you look into JAX-RS sources, then you will see that there is actually the Flow, but we are going to remove it later. Back to the SSE. So you can see that we are using already the terms from Flow APIs like publisher and subscriber. This can definitely change, and currently some of these interfaces are implemented, but again, this will be removed. So how does server endpoint or server resource which is capable of producing SSE events or SSE streams would look like? This is these are basically two resource methods. The most important one in this case is the method subscribe. If this is invoked, then SSE event sync, that's the representation of the client on the server side, will be injected, and then you can use it for sending events just for the single client. So this line will send single message with data welcome, and after that we are registering this into the SSE broadcaster. The other method is standard JAX-RS method. There is nothing new about it, but we are just accepting post requests with the entity, and we are using the entity as a message which is going to be broadcasted to all connected clients. So this is the server side, and let's look to the client side. On the left side, there is a subscriber. So this is the client which will call the subscribe method from the preview side. You might notice that the class or the main class or entry point on the client side is called SSE event source. It's the same as the JavaScript and event source. I'm not sure whether JavaScript has classes. I guess it does. But again, we are using Flow API, so the methods are slightly different. We are not directly registering callbacks like on message on, but we are just subscribing a subscriber or subset of methods which are present on Flow subscriber. In this case, we are just saying that we are interested only about the events, so we are not registering any close vendors and stuff like that. And once the event is arrived or is processed or received, then we are printing it out. On the right side, there is just a simple client which uses which sends these post messages to be broadcasted, and that's basically all about SSE. So one topic which I wanted to bring up is Java 9 readiness. You might know that there is, well, basically the most important thing about this is, I guess, that we already know how the JAX-RS API module will be called. It's Java JSRs, and this is its complete module info file. It's not yet. So basically, it's already part of the sources, but it's not being released yet. So if you look at the binary, which is available on Maven Central, then the compiled module info is not there yet. But if you download the sources and build it by yourself with Java 9, then it will be there. So if you want to test it, or if you want to have the API with the module info, then you can build it by yourself. Releasing it really soon, hopefully by the next milestone release. There is still some to do. We need to think about how to connect the API and the implementation properly, because currently there is a defined algorithm in the specification which kind of mimics the old service loader, but we need to be sure that this will still work on Java 9, and so we need to update it. Okay, what can you do if you want to help? Definitely, you can talk about JAX-RS, you can do blog post examples, and most importantly, at least for me, is if you would maybe rewrite or consider using some new features of JAX-RS in your application and just prototype in the API, on the API level, how that would be used, because we can definitely imagine lots of use cases, but maybe you have some case which we didn't think of, and we need to basically know your feedback. If you are a more hands-on person, then you can test the reference implementation, which is Jersey. It's jersey.java.net. That could be changed in the future, I guess. But anyway, the reactive client API, which was presented, is already there, so that's available today. And the servers and events implementation will be available soon. If you want to get some, if you want to post or let us know about your feedback for the specification, so for the API, then please use this mailing list, or you should be able to find it on this page, or you can even submit a bug or improvement if you think you have some case which we should know about. Just a list of milestone releases. The most important one is the last one. So JAX-RS 2.1 MO5 was released last Friday, and this is the version which will be submitted as an EDR. We are actually currently in process of submitting it, so it will contain the reactive client API and the servers and events as presented here. The last thing is the roadmap. So when JAX-RS was restarted, then we announced that we are going to do 3 big items. It was reactive client, servers and events, and non-blocking IO. Non-blocking IO is still in progress. It's actually a bigger feature because if you know JAX-RS more in detail, then you know that when processing entities on the client or server side, it doesn't really matter. You are always working with input and output streams, and that's basically blocking. So we want to get rid of that, but we still need to support it because we need to be 100% backwards compatible. So that's quite a challenge, but I hope we will be able to share some thoughts or proposals to the EG soon and move it a little bit forward. There are other improvements which we plan to do. As I mentioned, Java SE9 support, and we already did some part, but there is still something which we need to do. And there are new specifications which we need to integrate with, namely JSON binding. That's a very new specific. I think it was Dimitri about that. And serverless might bring something which we can use for, especially for support HTTP2. And there are some improvements in bean validation integration we should incorporate. That has not been started yet. We are basically trying to get the big items first, and after that we will try to do as much of smaller improvements as possible. Where we are now, we are just submitting the early draft review that should start hopefully any day now. Then you can see the plan for the next review. So next is public review and public final draft. We are definitely aiming for, well, we need to be aligned with Java EE8, so the final release would be around June or something like that, I guess. Maybe Linda can correct me if she wants. Okay, I believe that's it from me. So, Heather?
Okay. All right. Yes. Thanks, Pavel. Great to hear an update on what's going on with JAX-RS. Great to see you as Spec Lead. I know you've been involved with the team for some time, so thanks for that update. I know there are many Java user groups who are interested in getting involved and contributing to JAX-RS and learning about what's coming next, so that was very helpful. And next, we have Will Hopkins, who is the new spec lead for the security JSR. That's JSR 375. And thanks for joining us today, Will. I'm curious to hear what's going on with your JSR and how people can get involved. That's another one that's been very popular with user groups and Java developers. Curious what's going on and what kind of help you would need and what kind of feedback you're looking for.
Okay. Give me a minute to get some slides shared.
Okay, sounds good.
Can everybody see that?
Yep, yes, I can see your slides.
So I don't have quite as much material prepared as the other two folks do, but I thought I would go through sort of a description of what's currently in the JSR scope, and then talk a little bit about the schedule and status and what people can do to help. So at this point, there's basically 3 features that are in the spec. There's security context, which is basically an injectable context object that provides a standardized way to do things that are actually already available in the different containers, but with some different semantics. HTTP authentication mechanism, which is meant to be a simpler way for applications to do authentication, and identity store, which is meant to be a simpler way for applications to, or more properly actually for authentication mechanisms to access external stores and potentially embed stores. There's a number of common aspects to them. So one idea is to use a common approach to unifying container-specific mechanisms. All of the mechanisms are injectable by via CDI, and they're all related in the sense that they all sort of layer on top of each other and leverage each other. The security context has methods for authentication. That's a servlet-based method only, but the idea is that it's a standard way of calling authenticate rather than calling directly to the servlet context. There's also a method for getting the caller principal and determining if a user's in a role. Those are analogous to existing calls in the servlet container and the EJB container and elsewhere. But the idea, again, is to make it injectable and to have common syntax across containers. So those are some of the methods that it supersedes. HTTP authentication mechanism is, again, injectable. It has an interface that's similar to JASPIC server auth modules in that it will validate a request or secure a response and clean out a subject. It's invoked by the container or indirectly by calling the servlet context authenticate method by an application. It can be packaged with an application or supplied by the container, and it's meant to, if it needs to, delegate to an identity store. Well, one thing that's not encapsulated by this slide is that the idea is that this is essentially a simple way to write the sort of the guts of an authentication module and arrange to have it invoked via the container, and more specifically, because the container arranges to have a JASPIC server auth module deployed that invokes on the auth method, the HTTP authentication mechanism. Identity store is a way to sort of declaratively, well, to code a module that knows how to talk to an LDAP store or an RDBMS, but to be able to configure that in a declarative way through annotations, and then inject that and invoke on it from an identity store handler, which can also aggregate multiple instances. So sort of analogous to JAS in that you could have several identity stores configured, and there's an algorithm by which the handler will go through and invoke on each one until it either authenticates or fails to authenticate. And it can subsequently make a pass to acquire groups for a user if the user's groups are in a different store from where the store that the user's authentication account is. The identity store handler itself is actually replaceable if you don't like the default algorithm. But there's 3 types defined. One is embedded, one is LDAP, and one is database. And they can do authentication or authorization or both. What's meant by that is essentially authorization is a way of expressing the I'm going to get your groups semantic, as opposed to I'm going to authenticate you using a username and password. So it's got a validate method, which does the authentication and takes a credential. And then it's got get groups by caller principal, which is essentially the authorization side of it. One thing I will say here is that there's been some discussion on the list as to whether the embedded one is actually appropriate. The way it's currently defined is that it's an annotation, and you actually provide the usernames and passwords in code as parameters to the annotation. And there's been some discussion about whether that's something we'd really want to encourage. There are arguments in favor of the utility of that for demo purposes and quick prototyping. And then the counter argument is that if it's there, people will use it, and it's not a terribly secure way to do things. If anybody were able to download the class and decompile it, they'd have your passwords pretty easily. Status of the JSR. So there's been some pretty active discussion on the list recently. I'm working on getting an EDR1 out, with any luck today or tomorrow. We're a little bit later than we had planned to start the EDR review, but not terribly so. This is the current schedule that we're working to. So hoping to wrap it up by middle of June, basically. In terms of participation, obviously review and comment on the EDR when it comes out. Any comments or suggestions to the mailing list would be welcome. So that's users at Java EE securityspec.java.net. The repos for the security spec and the API and Soteria, which is the name of the reference implementation, are actually on GitHub. They're mirrored to java.net at the moment, but the master is on GitHub. So by all means, take a look at that and check it out. The spec is actually ASCII doc, as some of the other spec leads mentioned. So it's pretty accessible. And let's talk at Devoxx. I'll be at Devoxx in this month. And feel free to introduce yourself, and we'll talk. That's all I had.
Okay, great. Thanks, Will. Well, cool. I'll get to meet you in person then at Devoxx US, since you're going to be there, and maybe we can have some time to hang out in the Hacker Garden. That's one of the things that I'm organizing at Devoxx US in San Jose coming up later this month in March. There's a few JSR projects. So people can come and hear firsthand from you what you're working on and how they can help. So thanks for giving us that overview. Appreciate it. Let's see, any closing thoughts from Linda or any of the spec leads? Any questions or clarifications that you want to ask or offer to our viewers? I have a weird thing here. No? Okay. Well, I'll say, Gunnar, you mentioned something in one of your slides, which I think is really helpful. So you said to get involved, follow the discussions. I think all of the spec leads said that. So all of the JSRs have open discussion forums and open issue trackers. So do feel free to go ahead and join the mailing list and contribute there and follow the issue tracker and comment if you have something particular to add. But you also can join the JCP as members. We have new membership levels. And even if you're not going to join the expert group, if you're contributing to these discussions, you can now join the JSR as a contributor if you are an associate member, or any type of member really, but associate, partner, or full member. So if you are contributing to these discussions, I encourage you to go ahead and nominate yourself to be a contributor for the JSR and get your recognition, whether you're a Java user group partner member, an associate member, or a full member. So contact me with any questions about how to do that, but I definitely want to encourage the Java developer community to go ahead and get involved. We've made all of these things open and accessible to you so that you can go ahead and participate and contribute and collaborate with the community here, with the Spec Leads and with the expert group. So thanks again to these wonderful Spec Leads who joined us today. Appreciate you making yourself available and for sharing with us what's happening with your JSR. I think it's really essential to the community to have that visibility. So I appreciate you taking the time and putting together those thoughts. We may have future meetings. Message me and let me know what you want to hear about. I think we've heard from many of the Spec Leads so far already in these 3 meetings that we've had in 2017, but I'm open to continuing these meetings and broadcasts, so let me know what you want to hear about in the chat or in the comments. Thanks again for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the broadcast and hope to see many of you at a future Java conference around the world or on Twitter. We're all on Twitter. I think everyone shared their Twitter handles. I'm Heather VC, and all the Spec Leads I think shared theirs. So reach out to us on Twitter. Share your feedback in the comments. Closing words, and then we'll stop the broadcast.
All right, yeah, just thanks, Heather, for having us, and thanks everyone for joining. It was very nice to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. All right, see you next time at a future conference.
Bye. Thanks, Heather.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hey.